What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and today I'm back to talk about Warhammer 40K. In this one, we're going to be looking at a versus battle that actually happened within the tomes of the Arcs of Omen storyline that pits a demon blessed by the four Chaos Gods, Be'lakor, against the newest demigod, Vashtor the Archifane. These are some powerhouses when it comes to the demonic warriors of the Warp. One has been praised as a god by untold civilizations. Be'lakor is just a monster in the lore as well as on the tabletop. He's pretty much akin to a demon Primarch. However, when it comes to Vashtor, he's relatively new in the lore. He's trying to ascend to godhood. However, on the tabletop, he's very disappointing. I think even a regular demon prince is better than him. However, lore-wise, he brings a lot to the table, and his sculpt is amazing. So let's go ahead and read this excerpt from the Arcs of Omen novels that pits a battle between Be'lakor and Vashtor on the demon world of the Dark Angels, Wormwood. So without further ado, let's dive right in. What had been a hard-fought battle between invaders and defenders now became a three-way cauldron of violence that threatened to descend into outright anarchy. Be'lakor's disciples appeared to have no real agenda beyond indiscriminate violence and destruction. Armed with the element of surprise and cloaked by the supernatural gloom, that which Be'lakor had flooded much of the rock with, they struck and faded at will. Some of Vashtor's forces found themselves pinned between loyalists to the fore and suddenly manifested heretic Astarte foes behind. Others mistook enemy for ally in the confusion and were ruthlessly gunned down by those they believed comrades. Cut off in hostile territory and outflanked and surrounded, Vashtor's boarding parties suffered heavy losses. With Vashtor ripped unceremoniously out onto the battle station surface and his attention captured by his demonic foe, his assault upon the loyalist Voxnet ceased. Supreme Grandmaster Azrael's voice rang out through the Vox, pained but filled with cold fury. He reminded the Dark Angels of the oaths they had sworn to their chapter and to the Emperor, and that is to fight to the last breath in defense that they all held sacred, and to purge the heretic without mercy. Vashtor might have applied himself to the wider strategic situation had he been spared the energy and focus. He would have sought to extract as many of his mortal followers as possible from the closing jaws of the Dark Angel's vengeance, or even to coordinate one last bypassing strike to reach his prize. But instead, he was forced to defend his corporeal form from Be'lakor's onslaught. The Dark Master swung his blade of shadows with meteoric force, and Vashtor brought up his hammer to parry, only for Be'lakor and his blade to vanish in a whirl of shadows. Vashtor wheeled, hunting for his opponent through energistic and empiric spectra. He caught a flicker in several low-light and warp-sensitive registers and span in time to block his suddenly materializing foe's strike. The blade of shadows could pass through any physical impediment, but such was Vashtor's demonic will and command of the matter of real space that he was able to block the swing. The Archifane enjoyed a moment's grin at the outrage twisting Be'lakor's monstrous visage. His pleasure was short-lived as the Dark Master burst into a cyclonic storm of shadow that whirled around Vashtor, from which his blade licked out again and again. Be'lakor's taunts slithered through Vashtor's mind in an overlapping river of mocking whispers intended to distract and enrage. The Archifane felt his corporeal shell being torn by Be'lakor's blade, then ruptured again by a vicious stab to the chest. Vashtor understood the mechanisms of his own infinitely complex manifestation well, and knew that his form could not continue to suffer punishment of this sort without discorporeating into the warp. He would not allow it. Reaching out with his techno-arcane powers, Vashtor bled energy from the void shield still shimmering around the Tower of Angels. With a thought, he fashioned them into a temporary shield dome that he reinforced with his own infernal animus. The next blow of Be'lakor's blade rebounded from Vashtor's shield, and the Dark Master hissed his displeasure. Complex calculations raced through Vashtor's mind, swifter than any targeting cogitator could have managed. He reached out again and snatched a salvo of missiles as they streaked overhead, retargeting them with terrible precision. One after another, the plasma warheads rained down around the warring demon lord. Their detonations flared like miniature stars and blasted glassy black craters with each impact. Bellacor's shadowy form flickered and danced as he sought to evade the plummeting ordnance, before reforming in a clear space amid the bombardment. It was a gap that Vastor had left deliberately, and onto which he swung his hammer just as Bellacor manifested there. The blow landed under the Demon Prince's jaw and lifted him off his feet amidst an inky fountain of ichor. Vastor allowed himself a grunt of satisfaction and stalked after his foe. In the next instant, the Archifane found himself blinded by absolute darkness. He roared in frustration and took several wild swings, Fox projecting curses at Bellacor for fouling his plans that have been mortal centuries in the making. The Dark Master answered him with mocking mirth and a vicious blade strike that plunged up through the small of Vastor's back and erupted from his throat. In response, the Archifane vented infernal energies like an overheated plasma reactor, and he heard Bellacor hiss in pain, reeling back and ripping his blade free. The flare of ectoplasma burned away the supernatural darkness with which Vastor had been blinded, and he turned to face his foe again. Vastor saw that through Bellacor's corporeal vessel was scorched and battered. The Dark Master wore a knowing smirk. Bellacor mocked Vastor for his inability to understand the far-reaching implications of his intervention here, calling him a stunted would-be god. Besides, Bellacor continued none of Vastor's plans mattered now that they were all undone. The mortals would restore their shield all too soon, for his own disciples had driven off those of Vastor's followers, that they were sent to hamper the Dark Angel's labors. Meanwhile, Vastor's time had run out. For proof, Bellacor bade his foe simply look to the stars. Vastor, realizing now that his empiric tech senses were tingling a warning scent of their own, kept his eyes on Bellacor, but sent tendrils of awareness questing into void feeds and auspexes aimed into the void. He tasted ashes as he saw the Imperial warship closing upon the rock from the direction of Wentworth's Reach. Loyalist reinforcements were about to strike, and there was nothing now he could do to prevent them. Bellacor's disciples had abandoned the battle on Wentworth's Reach prior to their raid upon the rock. They had faded back into the shadows and left the cultist followers and turncoat militiamen to face the full wrath of the planet's defenders. Bellacor had spirited his mortal elites through the Empyrean and employed sinister sorcery to deploy them in the battle against the Dark Angels and the forces of Vastor. At the same time, Ultramarines and Nova Marines spearheaded the infantry offensive onto the rock, even as squadrons of Stormhawk interceptors streaked from their launch cradles to join the raging dogfights in the void, so waves of heavy gunships alighted while laying down hails of suppressing fire. The Nova Marines were charged to put down within the bounds of Old Adruk and reinforce the beleaguered Dark Angels there. Though he still had forces in the field, Bellacor had launched his attack with substantially less warriors than either of his foes, and his numerical disadvantage was now worsening by the moment. Yet the Dark Master had never sought a military conquest aboard the rock. He had sprung his trap in order to humble Vastor and ruin his plans, giving at least the appearance of doing so for the sake of spite and jealousy. Although he had not banished the Archifane, he had fouled his strategic situation beyond even Vastor's ability to recover. Seeing his work done and his enemies closing in, Bellacor gathered his might to plunge back into the shadows with his surviving disciples. Feeling the sorcerous energies gathering, Vastor launched one last furious attack upon his tormentor. The Archifane seized control of dozens of machine spirits, his scrap-cold tendrils dragging the barrels of tank guns, war engines, weapon systems, and in-placed batteries about to point at Bellacor and his forces. In the instant before the Dark Master was able to complete his incantation, Vastor unleashed a firestorm of apocalyptic proportions. Even Be'lakor himself could not entirely avoid the onslaught, and as he vanished into the shadows, he did so with a howl of rage, his mortal shell rent and cratered by a score of punishing impacts. And then, like smoke in a gale, the disciples of Be'lakor were spirited away. On the surface, Vastor knew that all was lost. Infernal fury gripped him as he beheld the ruin of plans long laid. Worse, without that which he had come to claim, the Archifane would not be able to complete the key, nor conclude his bargain with the despoiler. And with that being said, Vastor was able to leave the battlefield alive. So at the end of the day, we see a quick yet intense battle between Be'lakor and Vastor, and at the end of the day, it seems that Vastor's might is all about controlling technology and the weapons of war around him. His hammer is pretty powerful, but due to Be'lakor's wispy, shadowy form, he couldn't really get a hit in. It seemed that Be'lakor was gaining the momentum and the advantage over time, and yes, even though at the end of the day Vastor was able to drive Be'lakor away with the apocalyptic blasts of all the war machines around him, Be'lakor was kind of winning most of the fight. Now, if you were to play this out on the tabletop, I think it'd be an easy win for Be'lakor considering how strong he is, his ability to mitigate damage, and at the end of the day, Vastor just doesn't have enough toughness, enough wounds to overcome the onslaught that Be'lakor is capable of dishing out. So let me know if you think that perhaps in the future Be'lakor will ascend to some type of godhood and be akin to be on Be'lakor's status, or at least be able to go toe-to-toe with Be'lakor. But for now, I'm just wishing that we can get a Dark Mechanicus faction so we can finally have the Archifane be that, named character to lead them into battle. But for now, let me know what you guys think down below. Do you think the battle could have been closer? Do you think it made sense the way it came out? And at the end of the day, who are you voting for, Be'lakor or Vastor? Now don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you like what we do here at One Mind Syndicate. If you guys want to support us a little bit more, you can pledge a simple $1 a month over on our Patreon page, or help us out through Super Thanks. If not, it's alright, liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing the video does help us out a ton. As always, it's been the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Oh, if you could put my feet